Millionaire gave $1 to a girl selling candy. Her next words made his heart stop. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. $1, a cookie, a memory. The autumn wind swept briskly through the narrow streets of Manhattan's Upper East Side, rustling golden leaves and tugging at the coat collars of hurried professionals. The city, as always, was alive. Its sounds a familiar symphony of car horns, shoe heels on pavement, and the distant rumble of subway trains. Yet for Richard Bennett, standing on the front steps of the towering Bennett Capitol building, the world felt quiet. Too quiet. He adjusted his cufflinks absently, the engraved initials, RB, catching the sunlight like a private brand of success. 49, impeccably dressed, and with decades of corporate triumph under his belt, Richard looked every bit the Titan Wall Street imagined him to be. But inside, something was missing. The kind of missing that gnawed at a man in the quiet spaces between meetings and haunted him in the cold, cavernous silence of a penthouse built for one. Mr. Bennett called out Allison, his assistant, trotting to catch up with him. The Zurich report is finalized. Also, there's been a change in the Tokyo schedule. Cancel Tokyo, he interrupted, his voice calm but distant. Reschedule Zurich for next week. Allison blinked. Sir, those are both board level. I need a walk, Richard said, more to himself than to her. He turned from the waiting car, ignoring the open door and the startled driver, and began walking towards Central Park without another word. The wind nipped at his face as he moved, hands deep in his coat pockets, head slightly bowed. He passed upscale bakeries, luxury boutiques, children tugging impatient parents, and tourists with selfie sticks. But then something different caught his attention. A small folding table stood crookedly near a park bench, weighted down with a plastic jar, paper plates, and a hand-painted sign. It read, "Homemade cookies, $1. Help my grandma get her medicine." Behind it stood a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, bundled in a too-big hoodie with auburn curls spilling from under a knitted beanie. She was carefully arranging cookies on a tray, as if they were rare antiques. Her tiny hands moved with intention. One cookie broke, and she frowned, biting her lower lip before hiding it beneath the others. People passed without stopping. Richard slowed. Something about the child, a quiet resolve in her posture, the seriousness in her eyes, held him there. He approached, the crunch of leaves under his loafers muffled by the wind. "Afternoon," he said gently, kneeling slightly to be at her level. She looked up, her hazel eyes bright but guarded. "Hi, would you like to buy a cookie, sir? They're really good. $1. He glanced at the tray. They were imperfect, some lopsided, others a little too dark around the edges. But they looked honest. "Did you make these yourself?" "I helped," she said proudly. "My grandma showed me how, but she's sick right now, so I'm helping her back." "That's very responsible of you." She shrugged one shoulder, as if not quite sure what to say. Richard reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp 20. "I'll take all of them." The girl's eyes widened. "All of them? Really?" He smiled. "Really, but I want you to keep the change. Use it for your grandma, okay?" She scrambled to put the cookies into a paper bag, her fingers fumbling in excitement. "Thank you, mister. Grandma will be so happy." As she dug into her small apron to find a thank you sticker, a worn photo slipped out and fluttered to the ground. Richard bent down instinctively to pick it up and froze. The photo was faded but clear. Him, 10 years younger, smiling, his arm wrapped around a woman whose laugh he could almost hear just from the image. Sarah Collins. His breath caught. "That's my mommy," the girl said brightly, noticing his pause. "And that's my daddy. Mommy said he was very smart and kind, but he had to go away." Richard couldn't move, couldn't speak. His vision narrowed, the noise of the city blurring around him. "She said one day he'd come help us." "Like magic," the girl added with a shrug, as though it were a story she both believed and didn't. She reached for the photo. He gave it back slowly, fingers trembling. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Emily," she said with a smile. "Emily Collins." Collins. Richard staggered back a step, as if the name itself were a blow to the chest. His hands dropped to his sides. His mind raced. Sarah. He hadn't thought of her, truly thought of her, in years. He had made sure of it, buried the memories beneath spreadsheets and deadlines and sterile boardrooms. The woman who had once made him consider stepping away from the race. The one he left without goodbye. Emily began packing her table, her business for the day clearly done. She waved. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Couldn't respond. He stood there long after she disappeared around the corner, the cookies untouched in his hands. Above him, the wind rustled again. This time, it sounded like Sarah's voice. And for the first time in a decade, Richard Bennett felt the chill not just of autumn, but of awakening. New York City shimmered under the soft amber glow as Richard Bennett returned to his penthouse on the 49th floor, but his heart still burned with the image of a little girl on the sidewalk and a small photo that had fallen to the ground. Inside the serene cutout of his high-rise home, he sat on an empty leather chair, holding the time-worn photograph in his hand. Sarah Collins. Even though it was just a faded color print, her smile still took his breath away. A smile filled with quiet strength, capturing a moment that had once been the best of his life. Sarah had once been the soul Richard discovered back when he was just a young man driven by numbers. She was a literature professor at Columbia, with a captivating way of storytelling, a gentle view of the world like rippling water, and eyes that truly listened. They had shared countless intimate moments during those Brooklyn autumn days, browsing old bookstores together, sharing ice cream on an empty bench by the Hudson, or spending long nights talking about poetry and love. But when the path to prestige opened, an offer to become international director at the European branch of a top-tier financial institution, Richard chose to leave. The one who championed him most at the time was Uncle Charles, the man who had guided him from failure to the top. Charles had made it clear, love only holds you back. Sarah is a good woman, but your numbers are meant for greater things. Back then, Richard had stayed silent. He chose the career, chose the ladder of ambition over the woman who waited for him. He walked away without looking back. What Richard never knew, until tonight, was that Sarah had tried to reach out. She had written letters, made calls, even showed up at his office building alone, 7 months pregnant. All of it hidden, silenced, pushed aside for Charles to handle. Now, on this chilly autumn night, Richard looked back at his life. Wealth, status, respect, all of it fell hollow as he realized he had walked away from the one person who could have been his, the only woman who had ever truly loved him. On the table lay his phone. Richard hovered his hand over the screen, hesitantly typing. Sarah Collins' obituary. What he found stunned him. Sarah had passed away nearly a year ago from cancer. The obituary mentioned her daughter, Emily, and her mother, Margaret. Richard's breath caught. Sarah had raised her child alone, then passed without a word of blame. The price he had paid for success now seemed unbearably steep. But what if Emily was his daughter? The girl selling cookies on the street. Her eyes like Sarah's, her face a faint echo of his own. Richard felt his world begin to crack, but for the first time in years, he didn't want to run. He would go back. He would seek out the truth, no matter how late, how painful, how fractured the past. For the first time in his life, Richard Bennett wanted to make it right. That late afternoon, the sun was sinking behind the granite towers of Brooklyn. Richard Bennett stood in front of a worn, 3-story townhouse, its age showing in the weathered bricks. Outside the window, with faded floral curtains, a patch of red mustard flowers bloomed softly. In his hand was a printed fundraising flyer titled, "Help Grandma Helen Fight Cancer." Beneath it was a small photo, Emily with a gentle smile, and an older woman with tired, kind eyes, Helen, no doubt. Richard paused at the cracked concrete steps, drawing a long, steadying breath. Fear, uncertainty, and hesitation swirled around him. How does a man knock on a stranger's door to ask if a child might be his? And if she is, how do you start over after decades of silence? He rang the doorbell. The wooden door opened slowly. Standing there was an elderly woman, her eyes worn but not defeated. Her gaze lit up when she saw Richard, then quickly shifted to one of guarded caution. "I'm Richard Bennett," he said softly. "I saw the fundraiser for Grandma Helen, and for Emily." The woman nodded slowly. I'm Helen. I met Emily yesterday. She was selling cookies on the street. I recognized the photo in her backpack. Helen studied him for a moment silent. Then she turned and said, I figured this day might come. Come in. The apartment was modest but tidy and warm. A soft yellow light glowed overhead. The smell of cookies still lingered on linens hanging to dry. The walls were lined with framed photos, Sarah smiling, holding a tiny Emily with a younger, stronger Helen beside them. Sarah passed away over a year ago, Helen said, her voice trembling but steady. Cancer. Richard's heart clenched. He saw flashes of the Sarah he had known. Those expressive eyes, talking about poetry, Charlotte, Bronte, and late-night bus rides to the library. And now she was gone. Did she ever mention me? Helen nodded. Sarah wrote letters, sent emails, called many times. She held on to hope even after Emily was born. But she never got a reply. Richard felt a chill run over his skin like a cold wind. Charles, his uncle and guardian, the man who had steered every trip, every contract, every woman in his life. Charles had received all those messages, and he had let them disappear without ever passing them on. Helen placed a photo in front of him, Sarah holding a tiny baby Emily. She's your daughter. There's no doubt. Richard touched the photo. In that moment, something shifted deep inside him. From a man lost in a cold penthouse, he was suddenly a father, handed a second chance. Emily ran in from the other room, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. I remember you. You bought all my cookies yesterday. Richard smiled, trying to keep his voice steady. You're the best salesperson I've ever met. Grandma says I work hard, just like a grown-up. The girl beamed. Richard gently clutched the photo in his hand like a treasure. Inside him, something long dormant began to stir. Not just memories of a lost love, but the heartbeat of a family, waiting to be whole again. And the father in him, silent for so many years, had finally begun to awaken. Autumn in Brooklyn brought with it a crisp breeze and soft golden sunlight filtering through the trees, shedding their leaves. Richard Bennett, a man who had once lived in a world of numbers and contracts, was now learning how to be a father, a role entirely new and full of challenges. After the emotional conversation with Helen, Sarah's mother, Richard was allowed to see Emily more often. Each visit, he brought a small gift, a book, a homemade cookie, or simply a warm smile. At first, Emily still called him Mr. Bennett, but over time, her eyes grew friendlier, more trusting. Richard began to take part in Emily's daily life. He took her to school, helped her with homework, and occasionally they strolled together through the neighborhood park. One day, as they sat on a bench, Emily turned and asked, Do you know how to make a kite? Richard smiled, recalling his own childhood. I used to make kites with my father when I was little. We could try making one this weekend. The girl beamed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Moments like that became precious to Richard. He realized that, even though he had missed so many years, the bond between a father and child could still be rebuilt through the simplest things. One evening, as he walked Emily back home, she suddenly turned to him and said, Thank you for spending time with me. Richard felt his heart grow warm. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Thank you for giving me the chance to. Richard's journey into fatherhood was still long and filled with challenges. But with every small step, he was slowly discovering the true meaning of love and family. The sky over Manhattan was gray on that autumn afternoon, with heavy clouds mirroring the weight pressing on Richard Bennett's heart. It had been a week since he discovered Emily was his biological daughter, and the memories of Sarah still lingered with every breath. Yet something remained unclear, a missing piece in the puzzle of his past. Richard decided to return to his old apartment, the one he had once shared with his Uncle Charles. The luxurious yet sterile space, with its stark white walls and modern furnishings, now felt cold and unfamiliar. He walked into Charles's office, the room that held too many secrets. On the desk, Richard found an old wooden box. Inside was a stack of unopened letters, all postmarked more than a decade ago. Carefully, he opened them one by one, immediately recognizing Sarah's handwriting. The words were full of emotion, pleas, expressions of love, desperate cries that had never reached him. His heart tightened. He felt betrayed, not just by Charles, but also by himself for not questioning things sooner. He remembered the vague answers Charles had given whenever he asked about Sarah. Now, everything was painfully clear. Determined to uncover the full truth, Richard hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Charles's actions. What he found left him stunned. Charles hadn't just blocked communication between Richard and Sarah. He had actively interfered in Emily's life. Incredibly, Charles had even found a way to reach Emily and had been subtly poisoning her over time to paint the picture of an unstable household, aiming to disqualify Richard from gaining custody. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. It felt like the ground had collapsed beneath him, but he knew he couldn't fall apart. He had to protect Emily. He had to make things right. He decided to confront Charles. The conversation between two men who had once been as close as father and son was now charged with tension and deep emotion. Richard demanded that Charles step down from the company and sever all ties with his family. At first, Charles denied everything, but faced with undeniable evidence, he was forced to admit his actions. After the confrontation, Richard felt a bittersweet sense of relief. The weight had begun to lift, but the pain still lingered. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to walk it. With love in his heart and unwavering resolve, Richard believed he could rebuild a happy family with Emily, one founded not on secrets, but on truth, trust, and a second chance. The sky over Manhattan was bleak on a winter morning, heavy clouds hanging low as if mirroring the weight pressing down on Richard Bennett's heart. It had been a week since he discovered that Emily was his biological daughter, and the memories of Sarah still lingered in every breath he took. Yet something remained unresolved, a missing piece in the puzzle of his past. Richard decided to return to his old apartment, the one he had once shared with his Uncle Charles. The luxury space, once pristine with white walls and sleek modern furniture, now felt cold and distant. He stepped into Charles's office, a room that held far too many secrets. On the desk, Richard found an old wooden box. Inside was a stack of unopened letters, all postmarked over a decade ago. Carefully, he opened each one and immediately recognized Sarah's familiar handwriting. The words were filled with emotion, pleas, expressions of love, desperate messages that had never reached him. Richard's heart clenched. He felt betrayed, not only by Charles but by himself for not questioning things sooner. He recalled the vague answers Charles had given whenever he asked about Sarah. Now it all made sense. Determined to uncover the full truth, Richard hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Charles's actions. What he discovered was shocking. Charles hadn't only blocked all communication between Richard and Sarah. He had also interfered in Emily's life. Somehow, Charles had gained access to Emily and had been subtly poisoning her over time to create the appearance of an unstable household, with the intent of disqualifying Richard from gaining custody. Richard could hardly believe what he was hearing. It felt as if the world was collapsing beneath him, but he knew he couldn't afford to fall apart. He had to protect Emily. He had to make things right. He decided to confront Charles. The conversation between the two men, once as close as father and son, was now tense and emotionally charged. Richard demanded that Charles step down from the company and sever all contact with his family. Charles initially denied everything, but faced with undeniable evidence, he was finally forced to admit to what he had done. After the confrontation, Richard felt a sense of relief, but also deep pain. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges, but he was ready to face them. With love in his heart and unwavering determination, Richard believed he could rebuild a happy family with Emily, one founded not on secrets and betrayal, but on truth, healing, and hope. That Christmas morning was quieter and warmer than ever before. Though the snow hadn't yet fallen, the pine trees lining the streets of Brooklyn were already strung with colorful lights, their gentle twinkle evoking memories of bonds once broken, and now perhaps ready to be mended. For the first time, Richard Bennett wasn't spending Christmas alone in his cold, high-rise penthouse, surrounded by luxury and endless work. Instead, He was sitting in the modest apartment of Helen, Sarah's mother, who had passed, but left behind an irreplaceable legacy, Emily. The four of them gathered around a humble dinner table, with roast turkey, sautéed squash made by Helen's trembling hands, and cookies lovingly baked by Emily herself. In the corner, a small Christmas tree stood adorned with tinsel and handmade ornaments cut from old cereal boxes. Emily, dressed in a red knit sweater with a white bow in her hair, glanced shyly at Richard. She had grown used to his presence during family moments, still calling him Mr. Bennett. But today wasn't just Christmas. It was a turning point, the beginning of truth. After dinner, as only the warm glow of the living room lights remained, Helen gently placed her hand over Richard's. "It's time," she whispered. Richard nodded. He knelt down in front of Emily, his eyes filled with something different than before: uncertainty, tenderness, and deep love. "Emily," he began, "do you remember that photo you showed me the day you were selling cookies? The one with your mom and the man standing next to her?" Emily nodded slowly, her eyes wide and anxious. "That man," Richard said gently, "was me." The room fell silent. Emily turned quickly to Helen, then back to Richard. "You're my dad," she whispered. Richard could only nod. Tears streamed down his face. A man who had believed himself too hardened to cry. "I didn't know," he murmured. "Not until recently. But I'm trying to do what's right." Emily stepped forward, placing her small hand over his. "Can I call you Daddy?" This time, Richard didn't nod. He opened his arms and pulled his daughter close, holding her with the kind of love he had once believed only existed in fairy tales and faraway films. "You're the most beautiful Christmas gift I've ever received," he said softly, running his hand gently through her curly brown hair. Helen stood quietly by the window, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched father and daughter wrapped in each other's arms. Christmas had brought its miracle, and in that small apartment, glowing with twinkling lights, a new family had been born. Outside, snow began to fall. The familiar New York sky still shone down on towering buildings lit by street lamps and glowing billboards. But in a modest corner home in the Upper West Side, Richard Bennett lay on the rug beside the bed, listening as Emily read aloud a short story about stars. The tale reminded him of the gentle, sincere words Sarah used to say to him many years ago. On the ceiling of Emily's room, Richard had installed a glow-in-the-dark star system. Clusters of stars softly lit up against drifting clouds painted across the ceiling, like a child's dreams woven into the night. He had spent weeks designing it, choosing the colors, curating the books on her shelves, and eagerly explaining geography and the solar system to Emily with the enthusiasm of a father trying to make up for lost time. Since the day Emily learned that Richard was her biological father, she had changed. Where once she had called him Mr. Bennett, she now said Daddy in every everyday conversation. And each time she spoke that word, Richard's heart swelled. It wasn't just a name, it was forgiveness. It was a door opening to a role he had once believed he had lost forever. Richard cut back his work hours by 50% and scheduled Emily's school pickups like high-priority meetings no one was allowed to override. He taught himself to cook simple meals: cheesy scrambled eggs, peanut butter sandwiches, and carrot soup for cold days. Emily gave each dish a special name, like Super Space Eggs or Flying Carrot Feast. Richard had once worked with numbers bigger than a national budget, but nothing had ever felt more meaningful than wearing an apron and making lunch with his daughter. Each night, after story time, Richard sat quietly by her bed, watching Emily point up to the pretend stars and whispering thought-provoking questions like, "What did you learn today? Did you like playing with Emma today? What do you think about that star?" Emily would answer with imaginative metaphors, as if painting pictures with her words. It was her innocent wonder that cracked something open in Richard, reminding him just how simple true happiness could be. Each morning, instead of checking the financial news, Richard made hot cocoa for Emily and read poetry with her. Saturday nights became homemade pizza nights, where Emily was the head chef, wearing a giant chef's hat that nearly swallowed her face. Mondays were now fridge raid days, where they invented new meals using the last of the week's ingredients. One day, when Richard built an art corner for Emily with watercolor paints, brushes, and a wall she was allowed to freely draw on, he paused mid-laugh as Emily burst into giggles with paint all over her nose. That moment, Richard realized that a child could completely reshape an adult's life through love and simply being there. There were still times Richard thought of Sarah. In the quiet of night, after Emily had fallen asleep, he would often open the memory box filled with old letters and photos of her. But his greatest comfort was knowing that Emily was the living proof of a love once deeply real. He believed that Sarah had forgiven him, and the only thing she would have wanted now was Emily's happiness. One winter evening, while Christmas lights still twinkled along the streets of New York, Richard Bennett sat beside Emily's bed, reading her favorite fairy tale. Her soft giggles filled the room, warming his heart. But that joy didn't last long. The next morning, Emily suddenly came down with a high fever and began vomiting. Alarmed, Richard rushed her to the hospital. After several tests, the doctors discovered traces of a mild sedative in her system. Richard was stunned. He couldn't understand what was happening. Then he remembered the recent occasions when Emily seemed unusually tired after eating food brought by Charles, Richard's adoptive uncle. A terrible suspicion began to form. Richard immediately requested a review of the home's security camera footage. The recording showed Charles secretly adding an unknown substance into Emily's meals. The truth hit like a blow. Richard was overwhelmed with pain and fury. He confronted Charles at the office. In a tense and emotional showdown, Richard forced him to sign a resignation letter and leave their lives for good. For the first time, Richard stood up to the man who had once controlled every part of his life. Emily gradually recovered after receiving timely medical treatment. Richard decided to take legal action, filing charges against Charles for poisoning his daughter. The case drew public attention, but Richard no longer cared about reputation or wealth. His only concern was Emily's safety and happiness. After the incident, Richard valued every moment with his daughter even more. He devoted more time to her, attending school events, walking in the park together, and reading bedtime stories. Their father-daughter bond grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they sat beneath the glow-in-the-dark stars on her bedroom ceiling, Emily whispered, "I love you, Daddy." Richard pulled her into a tight embrace, tears sliding down his cheeks. In that moment, he knew, no matter how many trials life would bring, his love and presence in Emily's life were the most precious things he could ever offer. After everything they had been through, Richard Bennett realized that his luxurious penthouse was no longer the right place to nurture a family filled with love. He decided to search for a new home in the Upper West Side, somewhere warmer, more intimate, and better suited for Emily and Helen. The new home was a charming old brownstone with a red brick facade, large windows, and a small garden in the back. Richard felt an immediate sense of peace and belonging there, something he had never truly experienced in his previous apartment. At first, Helen, Sarah's mother, was hesitant when Richard invited her to move in with them. But after seeing his genuine efforts and commitment to building a loving home for Emily, she agreed. Helen's presence not only brought joy to Emily, but also helped Richard understand the deeper values of family, values he had long missed while buried in his career. Life in the new house unfolded through simple but meaningful routines. Each morning, Richard and Emily made breakfast together while Helen tended to the small backyard garden. In the evenings, the family gathered around the dinner table to share stories from their day and watch their favorite movies together. Richard also spent time redecorating Emily's room, transforming it into a dreamlike space with colorful wall murals and a cozy reading nook. He wanted Emily to feel that this wasn't just a house. It was truly her home, filled with love and care from the people who cherished her most. One day, while cleaning out an old storage room, Richard found a small box filled with letters and photographs of Sarah. He sat quietly, reading each word and reminiscing about the memories they had shared. Though it brought pain, it also filled him with gratitude for the chance to be a father and to make amends for the mistakes of the past. This new house became more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of new beginnings. A place where Richard, Emily, and Helen could build a home rooted in love, healing, and hope for the future. One spring morning, soft sunlight filtered through the window of the cozy brownstone home on the Upper West Side. Richard Bennett sat at the dining table, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the adoption papers laid out before him. Beside him, Helen, Sarah's mother, gently placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze filled with quiet encouragement. "Richard, Sarah always believed you would be a wonderful father. Now is the time to make that belief a reality." Richard nodded, emotions swelling in his chest. He knew that completing this legal process wasn't just a formality. It was a promise to Emily that she would always have a home, a family, and unconditional love. The legal journey, adopting a child legally in the U.S., requires many steps, including submitting applications, undergoing background checks, and participating in interviews with social workers. With the support of his lawyer and Helen, Richard quickly completed all the necessary procedures. He also arranged for Emily to undergo a full health evaluation to ensure she was thriving both physically and emotionally. Throughout the process, Richard never stopped being present for Emily, joining school events, taking walks in the park, and reading bedtime stories every night. Their father-daughter bond grew stronger with each passing day. Emily now called him Daddy, naturally and affectionately. Court day. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. Dressed in a sharp suit, Richard held Emily's hand tightly as they stepped into the courtroom. The judge, a kind-eyed middle-aged woman, smiled warmly upon seeing the two of them together. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "are you prepared to accept the responsibility of being Emily's father, to love and care for her for the rest of your life?" Richard looked into Emily's eyes, then turned to the judge. "I am, with all my heart and soul." The judge nodded, lifted her gavel, and declared, "The court officially recognizes Mr. Richard Bennett as the legal father of Emily Bennett." Applause filled the courtroom. Emily threw her arms around Richard, tears streaming down her cheeks. The family celebration. To celebrate the momentous occasion, Richard hosted a small party at home, inviting close friends and neighbors to join in their joy. The house was decorated with balloons and fresh flowers, creating a warm and cheerful atmosphere. During the gathering, Richard stood up and raised his glass. "Today, I didn't just officially become Emily's father. I came to understand the true meaning of family. Thank you all for being here to share this special day with us." Everyone raised their glasses in a toast. Emily leaned in and whispered in Richard's ear, "I love you, Daddy." Richard held her tightly, his heart full. The family photo. On Richard's desk sat a framed photo. Him, Sarah, and Emily, all smiling together. It wasn't just a picture. It was a symbol of love, forgiveness, and a new beginning. Every day, when he looked at it, Richard silently reminded himself of the promise he made. "You will never be abandoned again." After officially becoming Emily's legal father, Richard Bennett felt a profound transformation within himself. Board meetings, financial reports, and long business trips, once the center of his world, now faded in importance compared to the bright eyes and innocent smile of his little girl. Richard made the decision to step down from his direct leadership role at Bennett Capital. He passed the reins to a younger, more dynamic management team, individuals who could lead the company toward a more sustainable and compassionate future. This move marked not just a shift in his career, but a clear reflection of his new priority in life: family. Each morning, Richard woke up early to prepare breakfast with Helen and Emily. They shared simple meals together, filled with warmth and affection. After breakfast, he walked Emily to school, chatting with her and listening to her innocent stories. The rest of his day was devoted to charitable and educational projects, focused on supporting children and families in need. In the afternoons, he picked Emily up from school. Together, they strolled through the park, attended children's concerts, or simply played puzzle games at home. These quiet moments brought Richard a kind of joy he had never experienced during his years buried in work. One evening, as the family sat together in their cozy home, Emily looked up at Richard and asked, "Daddy, what is success?" Richard smiled, pulled his daughter into his arms, and answered, "Success is when you can smile every day, when you feel love from the people around you, and when you know you're never alone." For Richard, that had become his new definition of success, one not measured by wealth or recognition, but by love, presence, and the priceless moments shared with family. A year can change an entire life. On the first morning of April, sunlight filtered gently through the budding leaves, casting a soft golden hue on the red brick facade of the cozy brownstone on 89th Street. The white-painted door creaked open, and from within came the joyful laughter of a little girl, clear as springtime music, mingling with the gentle chime of wind bells hanging from a porch. Richard Bennett sat on the front steps, a now-cold cup of coffee in hand, watching Emily ride in circles on her new bicycle. Her purple helmet tilted slightly on her forehead, and her curly red hair, so much like Sarah's, floated behind her. Every turn of the wheels seemed to stir something miraculous in Richard's heart. The quiet realization that even a man who thought he'd lost everything could still find what matters most, if he's brave enough to stop and listen to his heart. Helen opened the door, carrying a tray of freshly baked muffins. She placed them on the small table by the porch and took a seat across from Richard. Though still recovering in health, her eyes lit up each time she looked at Emily and at Richard. "It's such a beautiful day," Helen said, her voice still a little hoarse but strong. "It is," Richard replied, his eyes still following Emily. "She's like the sun of this house." Helen nodded slowly. "And she brought the sun back to you." They sat in quiet understanding. The silence between them no longer felt like distance, but connection. "This time last year," Helen whispered, "Emily only remembered Sarah as a faraway idea. Now Sarah lives in everything she does, everything she says." Richard nodded. "Some nights, when I'm reading to her, she'll suddenly say, 'Mom used to read me this too, but your voice makes me feel safer.' And in those moments, I don't know whether to laugh or cry." Helen gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her gaze soft but firm. "You did right, Richard. Sarah may be gone, but she gave you the most precious gift of all, and you didn't let it slip away." Inside, the wall clock struck 9 a.m. "She has her school play today, remember?" Helen reminded. Richard laughed. "How could I forget? I'm the one who made props for the whole class." Helen chuckled too. "Never thought I'd see a former CEO glue that much construction paper." "I do it with all my heart now," he shrugged. Emily ran over, panting slightly, her cheeks pink from the sun. "Daddy, my helmet's crooked," she said. Richard knelt to adjust it, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Ready for the spotlight, little actress?" Emily nodded eagerly. "I'm the sun in our play today, and I'm going to shine for real." All three laughed. In the gentle morning light, surrounded by simplicity and sincerity, no one thought about stocks or profits. No one mentioned old wounds. Only the present remained, where they lived, breathed, and loved together. That afternoon, the Greenwood Elementary schoolyard shimmered with the colors of family. Parents, grandparents, and teachers filled the rows of folding chairs in front of the small stage. On stage, the first graders were dressed as trees, clouds, rain, rainbows. And in the middle of it all stood one radiant sun, Emily. "Hello, everyone." Her voice rang out loud and clear. "I'm the sun. I help the trees grow. I make people happy. But I shine brightest when my family is with me." The line struck a chord, bringing tears to the eyes of more than a few grown-ups in the audience. After the performance, Emily ran straight into Richard's arms, holding up her Brightest Star Performer award. "Do you think I look like the sun, Daddy?" she asked, eyes sparkling. "More than any sun I've ever seen," Richard whispered, hugging her tightly. That evening, in the living room of their new home, where a framed photo of Sarah, Richard, and Emily rested atop the fireplace mantel, Richard took out a small notebook. It was Sarah's teaching journal, one Helen had found among her old belongings. He opened to a page where Sarah's graceful handwriting glowed softly beneath the light. "If one day Richard finds her, I hope he loves her with my part too." Richard closed his eyes as tears streamed silently down his cheeks. He had once lost the chance to love someone fully, but this time he wouldn't let it pass. He would love Emily, with everything he had left to give. A year had passed since that fateful day Richard stumbled upon a little girl selling cookies on a Manhattan sidewalk. 1 year of revelations, heartbreak, healing, and rebirth. Emily, this little girl, had taught him the meaning of family, forgiveness, and what success truly is. Not numbers, not titles, but a small voice resting against his shoulder, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." And to Richard, that was the greatest reward life could ever offer. One autumn afternoon, soft sunlight filtered through the golden leaves of Central Park, casting a warm and peaceful glow. Richard Bennett sat on an old wooden bench, his eyes following Emily as she ran through the falling leaves, laughing joyfully. Her curly red hair danced in the breeze, reminding him of Sarah, the woman he had once loved with all his heart. Beside him, Helen, Sarah's mother, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. She watched her granddaughter with tender eyes, then turned to Richard and said softly, "She looks so much like Sarah." The eyes, the smile, everything. Richard nodded, emotion welling up inside him. Memories of Sarah flooded his mind. Afternoons spent walking hand in hand through the park, conversations filled with laughter and light. But those days were now part of the past, leaving behind an emptiness that could never be fully filled. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Emily suddenly asked, "Daddy, what was Mommy Sarah like?" The question caught Richard off guard. He looked at Helen, then back at his daughter, and replied gently, "Your mom was an amazing woman, intelligent, kind, and full of warmth. I loved her very, very much." Emily smiled, her eyes shimmering with curiosity and longing. "I wish I could have met her." Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as silent tears fell. He knew that even though Sarah was no longer with them, her love lived on, in his heart and in the very presence of their daughter. From that day on, Richard made it a habit to share stories with Emily about Sarah, beautiful memories they had once made together. He wanted Emily to know that, although the past carried its sorrows, love and forgiveness would always light the path forward. One winter morning, as snow began to fall, Richard, Emily, and Helen visited Sarah's grave. Emily gently placed a drawing in front of the headstone, a family portrait with the words, "Thank you, Mommy, for giving me a daddy." Richard was overcome with emotion. In that moment, he understood something deeply. Sarah had never truly left. She lived on in Emily's eyes, in her smile, and in her boundless compassion. Life moved forward, but to Richard, each day with Emily and Helen was a gift. He learned to embrace the present, to lay down the regrets of the past, and to live fully, with love at the center of it all. One evening, as the family sat beside the fireplace, Emily rested her head on Richard's shoulder and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." Richard smiled, wrapping his arms around his daughter, his heart full. He knew then, as he always would, that no matter what trials life may bring, love and forgiveness would always be the guiding light, leading them to peace and to happiness. That spring, sunlight gently stretched across the streets of the Upper West Side, where the Bennett family's home stood. The red brick house with its white picket fence and small front garden, where tulips were blooming in full color, had become a symbol of new beginnings, of love and of forgiveness. Richard Bennett, a man who had once devoted his life to work and ambition, now found joy in the simplest things. Every morning, he and his young daughter, Emily, tended to the garden together, chatting about small but meaningful things. Helen, Sarah's mother, often joined them, bringing warmth and wisdom through her stories and advice. One afternoon, as the three of them sat on the porch enjoying tea and cookies, Emily suddenly asked, "Daddy, can I invite some friends over to play?" Richard smiled and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. This house will always be open to the people you care about." And so, the Bennett home became a gathering place for neighborhood children, a place filled with laughter every afternoon, where stories were shared and friendships grew strong. Richard also began taking part in community activities, sharing his story with others, especially older adults. He spoke of his journey to find his daughter, about love and forgiveness, and about learning to slow down and truly appreciate the precious moments in life. One day, he was invited to speak at a conference on family and community. Standing before hundreds of people, he said, "I used to think success meant achieving big goals, acquiring material things. But now I understand that true success is being able to look into your child's eyes and see love. It's being able to forgive yourself and others. It's living each day with gratitude and compassion." After his speech, many people came to thank him, saying his story had touched their hearts and inspired them to reevaluate their own lives and relationships. On a warm summer evening, as the family sat together on the porch gazing at a sky full of stars, Emily turned to Richard and said, "Daddy, I love you." Richard pulled his daughter close, tears quietly falling down his cheeks. He knew then, as he always would, that no matter how turbulent life might be, love and forgiveness would always be the light that led them to peace and happiness. Life is a journey full of surprises, where we may stumble, lose our way, but also where we can discover love, forgiveness, and joy. Cherish the loved ones beside you. Open your heart to love and to forgive, because that is the key to unlocking a life of meaning and fulfillment. Live each day with gratitude. Love and be loved, because life is the most precious gift we have. In today's fast-paced modern world, we are often swept up in the whirlwind of work, endless meetings, and ambitions that know no bounds. It's easy to lose sight of the core values, family, presence, and the seemingly small moments that form the foundation of a meaningful life. The story of Richard Bennett and little Emily is a gentle yet powerful reminder of that truth. Richard, a man who once believed that success meant wealth, power, and influence, went through a painful journey to realize what truly matters: family. Discovering he had a daughter he never knew existed didn't just upend his life, it awakened him. From a cold and calculated businessman, he became a tender father, a grateful son-in-law, a man devoted to his family. He chose to step outside the comfort zone of control and strategy to learn how to love unconditionally, to be truly present each day, and to accept the mistakes of his past. Their story prompts us to ask ourselves, how long has it been since you truly talked to your child without being interrupted by a phone call? How long has it been since you looked into the eyes of someone you love and said, "I love you," or "Thank you for everything"? Perhaps we don't need to go through great loss or life-altering events like Richard to change. The lesson here is, choose to be present. Spend time not just making a living, but actually living fully with the people who love you. None of us knows what tomorrow holds. But if each day you choose to love, choose to forgive, choose to let go of anger so you can hold your child, or simply share a peaceful dinner with someone you care about, then you are planting seeds of true happiness. Don't wait to be less busy to nurture your relationships. Just like Richard learned, sometimes a small hand in yours, a child's drawing, or a simple cookie can carry a healing power far greater than fame. Family, though imperfect and humble, is still the one place that will always welcome you home. And real love, as Richard came to understand, is not something to be earned, but something to be given. Right now, today. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.